Mostly good morning. I am sorry that I can't be there with you in person, but Baruch Hashem, at least we're able to learn virtually together. I didn't want to miss out the opportunity to do this Gemara with all of you. I want to thank all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. They'll be listed in the podcast and on the YouTube channel immediately below the link in the shir. And let's begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Tes Zayin 16. We are picking up on Tes Vav Amud Beis 15b, and we are picking up in Yahrzeit Hashem 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up on the bottom. My V'samira. So let's remember again, yesterday's daf we ended off with the Gemara comparing Avram Avinu to Eov and highlighting that as great as Eov was, Avram Avinu was even greater. So it used the lashon of a sar meira, that Eov went ahead and he literally stayed away. He swerved away, removed himself from that which was evil. Says the Gemara, what does this mean? Rabbi Shmuel, Eov vachar b'mamona haya. Eov was a vachar. Eov was very giving or forgiving with his money. What does this mean? In hagoshel odam no same. So in general, let's say you owe a worker a half a pruta. So you can't really pay a half a pruta because a pruta is the lowest denomination of currency. So if you owed someone a half a pruta, how would you pay them? So essentially you'd give them a store credit and they could get a half a pruta's worth of merchandise. Eov vitra mishalo. But Eov, when he owed someone a half a pruta, he just gave them the whole pruta. So it's interesting how the Gemara understands his enhanced piety is his willingness to be generous with his workers. So now remember again, the Satan is coming along, and remember, Satan says, I've gone through the world, I've seen no one as righteous as Avram Avinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, really, have you seen my servant Eov? And now the Satan comes along and tries to detract from Eov's piety. And he says, of course, Eov is pious. He has everything in the world. You've given him everything. What does it mean that you blessed his the work of his hands? Ultimately, Eov was so successful that if you took money from Eov, right? Let's say if you got a pruta from Eov, that pruta would be gebenched, it would be blessed, and you would see incredible payros from it. So the Gemara says, alright, so called Misbarach. Mayu Mikneo Parasbars. What does it mean? And his flock literally proliferated on the earth. The flock of Eov defied the normal way that flocks work. How so? So the way it works normally is that wolves go ahead and kill the sheep. Eov's flock, so the sheep killed the wolves. V'ulam shlachna yadcha v'naga b'chala shelo im lo hayom ubana v'benosav oklam v'shol sinayim b'beis achirim habachar umalach ba'el Eov vayomer habakar hayu charshos. So now what happens? So the Satan essentially says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu like this: Eov loves you. You know why Eov loves you? You know why Eov is so pious? Because he has everything in the world. Take it away from him, and we'll see exactly how pious he is. So now the Gemara begins to relate pasuk after pasuk of how Eov loses his brachas. So the first step. So again, Eov's children were sitting and eating in the home of the oldest son. Umalach ba'el Eov, and the messenger came to Eov and he said, Habakar hayu charshos, the cattle were plowing, and ultimately again, and the donkeys were grazing, and they were all wiped out. So the Gemara says, what does it mean that the cattle were threshing and that the donkeys were grazing? So it's interesting. The idea over here is the Gemara points out that this was another bracha that Eov experienced, namely that Eov's flock, his animals, when they would become pregnant, they would give birth almost immediately. Rashi says over here in the top of Tezayin 16a, so again, it's actually interesting over here. So Eov had this special bracha that apparently his animals had a very short gestational period. They'd become pregnant and give birth almost immediately. And the Gemara calls this me'ein olam haba, that this is almost a taste of the world to come. What's the pshat? That a short gestation period is a little taste of the world to come. So think about this just a moment. If you think about pregnancy as a metaphor, right, for life, that what happens, a person creates something. So in this case, again, let's say a man and woman create life, but that life is not immediate. It takes months and months and months for the baby to form, for the baby to grow, and then only 9 months later is the impact of their efforts truly seen. And the truth is, that's a lot of like what this world is. So much of life is we put in effort, but I don't see the results of my efforts until sometime later on. And sometimes even it's not in my lifetime, sometimes it's generations later. Part of the beauty of the Messianic era is that we'll put in effort and we'll be able to see immediate results. Think about that. What a life that would be, to be able to know that if you're willing to work hard, again, you're not going to see results without effort. That never happens. But in this world, again, one of the most frustrating things is I could work so hard and for so long on something, and yet it won't materialize. In Mashiach, right? In Mashiach, in Messianic days, so you'll put in the effort. If you're willing to put in the effort, you will immediately see the results. Incredible. So again, as this messenger is talking, another messenger comes, Vayomer, Ish Elokim, so again, what essentially happens is messenger after messenger comes, bearing a message of misfortune. Each of them telling Eov, you've lost something else. Vayomer kastim samu shlosha roshim vayifshatu es gemalim vayikachum. The kastim came and they took your camels. Odzem medaber v'zeba vayomer banecho b'nosecha ochlu v'shosim yayim v'beis acheihem habachar v'nei ruach gedola ba'a me'ivra midbar v'yayiga v'arba pinos hamayis. Another messenger comes, Eov. Remember, as the pasuk said before, that all of Eov's children were having a meal together in the home of the firstborn. A massive wind came and blew down the entire house. And Eov, all of your children died. So what happened? Vayakam Eov vayikra es meilo vayigaz es rosho. So Eov got up, he tore his clothing, and literally he tore the hair out of his head. So again, it's incredible. Eov, just to understand just the profundity over here. Eov had everything. He had everything. And then literally again, in a matter of moments, just he lost everything. Vayomer, he said, Aram yatzasi mi beten imi va'aram ashuv. I came out of my mother's womb naked, and I will go back that way. In other words, Eov saying that I came into this world with nothing, and apparently I'll leave this world with nothing. Hashem nasan v'Hashem lakach yehi shem Hashem mevorach. Hashem has given, Hashem has taken. The name of Hashem will be blessed. So these words are so incredibly profound because they represent the very essence of emunah. Whatever I have is from Hashem. Hashem gives, Hashem takes. But whether Hashem gives or Hashem takes, Hashem's name should always be blessed. We actually recite this phrase today in a tefillah that is called Tzedakah, acceptance of judgment. When a person has to bury a loved one of the close relatives, so one of the tefillahs that we accept is what's called Tzedakah, the acceptance of judgment, where in the most painful moment of loss, a Jew accepts the judgment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as being correct and being just, even if I can't understand it. And almost like the quintessential part of that tefillah is this phrase: Hashem nasan, Hashem lakach, yehi shem Hashem avarach. Hashem has given, Hashem has taken, Hashem's name shall be blessed. All comes from Eov. B'chozos lachat Eov lo nasan tefillah elokim. With all of this dramatic loss, Eov did not curse Hashem. He didn't curse Hashem. He didn't turn his back on Hashem. He didn't curse HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vayhi hayom vayavav b'nei Elohim li'yatzev vayomer Hashem el Satan. Okay, so fast forward a little bit. So once again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is convening his staff, meaning all the malachim are there. Satan comes along. He says, Satan, where were you? Where were you? Vayana Satan va'elas Hashem vayom mashut ba'aretz. And Satan says, I was traveling around the world. So, Amy Zetavo. So it says, Satan specifically, where did you come from? So I'm sorry, where did you come from? From traveling around the world. I'm the Ribbon Shalom Shati b'chala olam v'lamatzasi ka'avdecha Avram. I've traveled all along the world, and I have never seen anyone as pious as your servant Avram. Shamarta lo kum hisalech, first wide line on 16a. Kum hisalech ba'aretz le'akal rachba ki lecha et nena ubishah shebikesh likbar sar lamatza makom l'kovra. So the Satan says, look at this Avram. You promised him. First of all, he uprooted his life. He went to a foreign land that he didn't know. You told him that the land was going to be his. And then when it came time for him to bury his beloved Sarah, he didn't have a burial plot. He had to buy it. Not only did he have to buy it, he had to buy the top dollar from Ephron Achiti. And yet, despite all of that, he never questioned your ways. That's Avram Avinu. Vayomer Shem el Satan hasamta libcha el avdi Eov, excuse me. So Hashem says once again to the Satan, tell me now again, just understand, They've had this conversation already, right? The Satan was given permission to take everything from Eov. Everything from Eov. So now they're having the same conversation. Once again, the Satan extolling Avram Avinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying, tell me, have you seen my servant Eov? Ki ein kamo ba'aretz, there is no one like him. V'odena machzik bitumaso, v'atisisini bo levalo chinam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to the Satan, what are you doing? You're baiting me. This is incredible. HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying to the Satan, like, you're baiting me. We had this conversation already. So why are you baiting me or inciting me to do something that's going to negatively impact Eov? Had the pasuk not said it, you wouldn't be able to say it yourself. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu is like with the Satan, almost like a person who's incited, right? Who's riled up and then takes the bait. Masa ola umargiz nota rishus v'nota neshama. We learned, what does the Satan do? The Satan goes down to the world, right? Goes down to the world, entices people to sin, comes back up, then it incites HaKadosh Baruch Hu against the person who sinned. Nota rishus, he gets permission from God, v'nota neshama. In other words, the Satan is always stirring the pot. In this world, he entices people to sin. After they sin, he goes out and he prosecutes them against the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, receives rishus from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to punish them, meets our punishment in this world. Vayana Satan es Hashem vayomer, ar ba'ad ar, v'chol asher leish yitin ba'ad nafsho, ulam shlach na yadcha v'ga el atzmo ve'al b'saro lo parach yivarecha. So what happens? So the Satan says, you're right, I saw this Eov, he's great. And it's true, he lost everything and he didn't turn on you, but that's because his own life is intact. You know, as long as a person has their health, they could pretty much weather any type of adversity. Satan, Baruch Hu says to the Satan, fine, Satan, you could do whatever you want to Eov, but you can't take his life. In other words, you can make him ill, but you can't take his life. So the Satan left the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he struck Eov with illness. Amar Yitzchak, Kashat Tsaro Shal Satan Yoser Mishal Eov. This is incredible. The tsar of the Satan. What does this mean? The difficulty the Satan has of meting out punishment but yet not taking life is even more difficult than the tsar that Eov experienced. This could be compared to the Eved said to his master, Shavar Chabis Ushmaras Ayena. Break the barrel, but keep the wine. Break the barrel, keep the wine. So the Satan is tasked ultimately again with meting out punishment, but yet not taking life. So here, make Eov suffer, but you can't take his life. So the Gemara compares this to a master who says to his servant, break the barrel, right? Break the barrel, but make sure you don't lose any wine. So the Gemara says, again, so we're going to explain this a little bit more in depth in just a moment. Hu Satan, hu Yetzahara, hu Malach HaMaves. So I said, this is an incredible thing. And Reb Shlomo says, what we call the Satan, which is this prosecuting angel, this prosecuting force that entices us to sin, is the same thing as the Yetzirah, is the same thing as the Malach HaMaves, the angel of death. All three of these things are really one in the same entity. So again, the Satan, the prosecuting angel, the Yetzirah, the internal mechanism, that internal force, that internal self-sabotaging force that convinces us, allows us to sin even when we know it's not the right move. The Malach HaMaves, the angel in charge of death, all one entity. Satan d'chsiv, vayetze Satan me'ez pnei Hashem, hu yetzahara, ksiv hasam rak ra kol hayom, ksiv hacha, rak es nafsho shema, rak elav atishlach yadcha, hu Malach HaMaves d'chsiv, ach es nafsho shemar. So Alma bididei kaima. So I would say, so ultimately again, also because you find the same wording in all three different contexts, these three different entities, leads Reish Lakish to say they're really one and the same. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Levi, so now what does this mean practically? Practically, that the Satan, the Yitzhahara, and the Malach HaMaves are all one entity. So one more piece that will tie it together. Amar Rabbi Levi, Satan upenina l'shem Shamaim niskavnu. The Satan, ultimately again in this story of Eov, and Penina was the co-wife of Chana, who were both the wives of Elkanah, right, who becomes the father of Shmuel. So remember again, Penina had many children. Chana didn't have children, and Penina would sometimes act in what appeared to be a callous or unfeeling or unfeeling or insensitive way towards Chana, and would cause Chana a lot of pain. So Levi says the Satan and Penina both have the best intentions. So the Gemara says, what does this mean? Satan came on the Chazal HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not daite Basra Eov. So the Satan was afraid, the Satan in this story of Eov was afraid that HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw how much Hashem loved Eov, and he was afraid that Hashem would forget Avram. Now, what does it mean forget Avram? So forget the Rachmanos. In other words, the Hashem has a lot of compassion upon Klal Yisrael because of Avram Avinu. He was concerned that the schus of Satan was concerned that the schus of Avram Avinu would no longer play prominent in the mind, so to speak, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the Ribono Shel Olam was so preoccupied with Eov. And therefore, again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Satan kind of seeks to downplay Eov a little bit in order to highlight the prominence of Avram. Penina Dechsev, V'kiastat Sarasa, Gam Kas Bavor Her Ima. So ultimately, again, the Gemara says, Penina, why did Penina go ahead and get Chana upset? V'kiastat Sarasa, Gam Kas Bavor Her Ima. She wanted Chana to cry out. Meaning what? That Penina felt that Chana wasn't davening hard enough for a child, that Chana was not engaging in enough spiritual activity. So what Penina did, again, whether it's the right thing, not the right thing, but what Penina did is she intensified the pain of Chana in order to go ahead and cause Chana to turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu even more. And in the schus of turning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu even more should be benched with a child. Okay, so let's say it's really incredible. Darsha Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Bepapanoi. So Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Darshan this in Papanoi. Asa Satan Nashkan Lekar. The Satan came and kissed his feet. What does this mean, the Satan came and kissed his feet? The Satan appreciated that Rav Acha Bar Yaakov stuck up for him. That the Satan kind of gets a very bad rap as just being evil. Meanwhile, again, the Satan really actually had the best interests of Klal Yisrael in mind. He didn't want HaKadosh Baruch Hu to forget Avram Avinu and just to focus on Eov, so he seeks to diminish the greatness of Eov in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's eyes. So we'll say, let's talk about this for just a moment. There's two pieces to this. In general, this story of Eov, which we'll come back to in just a moment, but to focus maybe a little bit more on this statement of Reish Lakish, that the Satan, the Yetzer Hara, and the Malach HaMavis were all one entity. So we'll say, let's zoom out a little bit. Let's focus on the Yetzer Hara, because I think that's the easiest illustration. The Yetzer Hara, as much as it represents this internal self-sabotaging mechanism, it's for our good. Right? All of us would agree with Adi Yetzer Hara, life would not be worth living. The Yetzer Hara creates the struggle. The struggle creates the opportunity for growth. Without the struggle, there's no growth. Without growth, there's no life. So the Yetzer Hara is actually my best friend in the world, because it is only through the Yetzer Hara. It's true. I hate him. I can't stand him because I feel like so many times in life I mess up. But the Satan gives me the opportunity to kind of face pushback, to face tension, and the Yetzer Hara forces me to get on my game. The Yetzer Hara forces me to go ahead and identify my weaknesses and to make a plan to work through them. The Satan therefore becomes my best friend along my journey of personal growth. Once you understand that, then the rest of the statement makes sense as well. The Satan is the same thing. The Satan is that prosecuting angel. The knowledge that there is an angel that prosecutes against me in the celestial sphere keeps me honest. I don't want to give him material. I don't want for the prosecution to have any type of file on me. It forces me to look at the way I live. It forces me to look at the things that I do and to try to figure out how I can live a better and holier life. Malach HaMavis, same idea. I will say, the greatest gift in this world is death. Because the knowledge that we die, the knowledge that at the end of the day, life comes to an end, forces me to maximize life. Can you imagine what we would look like if we were immortal? Right? What's the impetus to do tshuva? What's the impetus to get your life together? What's the impetus to fix the things that are broken? And there's none, because whatever I don't get done this century, I'll get done next century. And whatever doesn't happen this century, next century will happen in 5 centuries from now. The knowledge that there is a Yom HaMisa, a day of death, that there's a Malach HaMavis, and to compound that, I don't know when death comes. That is what forces me. That is what propels me to lead and to live a meaningful life. And that's why Reish Lakish says, Satan, Yetzer Hara, Malach HaMavis, all of these forces that we often look at as evil, as terrible, they're our best friends in the world. Because at the end of the day, it is these forces that push us and propel us to lead lives of meaning, of holiness, and ultimately of tshuva. Incredible. Let's go right there. So the Gemara says, so now even though Eov has lost his family, he's lost his possessions, now he's lost his health. He never rebelled, he never uttered a negative word against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Amar Rava, b'svasav lo chata b'li bo chata. He never uttered a negative word, but in his heart, he had negative feelings towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. My kamar, eretz nasna biyad rasha, p'nei shoftei chasa, im lo efo mihu. So ultimately, again, what does Eov say? Someone over here quotes the pasuk. Literally, again, the world, the earth has been handed over into the hands of evil ones, right? The judges don't see anything. Eov wanted to turn the pot over on its mouth. So the idea that he was turning on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Eov had reached a breaking point where theologically he was turning against God. Eov never spoke negatively about God. Who did Eov speak negatively about? The Satan. Eretz nasna biyad rasha. Rabbi Lazar Omer. So what does it mean that the earth has been given over into the hands of the wicked? Rabbi Lazar Omer bikesh Eov lafal chasakar al piyah. So Rabbi Lazar says Eov was talking badly about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, saying that the Ribono Shel Olam has abdicated his responsibility to look out for me. I'm Rabbi Yeshua lo divrei Eov el klape Satan. No, chas v'shalom. Eov wasn't talking out against God. Eov was talking out against the Satan. Al daitcha kilo ersha ve'ein miyad chamatz. Amar Rava bikesh Eov liftar kala olam kulam and adin. Amar lefan of Ribono Shel Olam. So what happened? So Eov wanted to free the entire world from judgment. Eov wanted to advance an idea. Rashi says over here, Medino Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lomar Sha'anusin Hein Idea HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shebar Yitzhahara. So ultimately, again, so Eov wanted to free man from judgment, essentially saying HaKadosh Baruch Hu pulls all of the strings, and we really have no choice. Al daitcha kilo ersha ve'miyad chamatza. Literally, again, it's because of you that I will not sin, and there is no one who could save me from your hands. What does this mean? Amar lefar ribono shalom barasa shar parsos of sedukos, barasa chamar parsos of klutos. You, for example, you created an ox with split hooves and a donkey with hooves that are not split. Barasa gan edom, barasa gehenim. You created gan ed, you created gehenim. Barasa tzadikim, barasa rishayim. You created some people wicked, some people righteous. Mima aki vayadcha. There's no choice. There's no choice. At the end of the day, so what he's saying is the same way that the ox can't become a donkey, and a donkey can't become an ox. A tzaddik can't become a rasha can't become a tzaddik. At the end of the day, you created the world a certain way, you created people a certain way. Some have a yetzer tov, some have a yetzer hara, and that's it. What did Eov's friends respond to him? Well, what does this mean? Bara Kadosh Baruch Hu Bara Kadosh Baruch Hu Yetzahara, Baralo Torah Tavlin. You're right. So they said to Eov, you're right, but you're wrong. Kadosh Baruch Hu did create the Yetzahara, but the same Ribono Shel Olam who created the Yetzahara also created an antidote. What's the antidote? Torah. In other words, they were saying to Eov, there is free will in this world, and just because Kadosh Baruch Hu created certain ways, He also created the mechanisms to be able to change those very things. So the same Hashem who created the Yetzahara also created a Torah to be able to offset it. Which I always say is such a profound idea in and of itself, that sometimes, when we struggle with something with our Yetzer Hara, so of course, again, I have to look at the area of struggle. What am I struggling with? Why am I struggling with it? What are the triggers? And how do I make a plan to ultimately, again, overcome this particular Yetzer Hara? But there's something else. Sometimes when a person is struggling, the best thing you could do for yourself is to learn Torah. Why? Learning Torah is going to be the answer to everything. So not necessarily, but Torah is the medicine. Torah is the medicine. Torah is the antidote. That somehow what Torah does is it gives me strength to be able to meet my challenges. So learning Torah itself may not give me the answer to all of my questions, but learning Torah absolutely gives me the strength to be able to find those answers, to devise those strategies, and to wage those battles. What's the meaning of the pasuk? Berchas oved alai tavo. V'leiv almana aranin. So what does this mean? Birchas oved alai tavo. What does this mean? That literally the blessing of the lost one shall come upon him. So what did Eov used to do? Eov used to quite literally steal the fields of orphans, improve it, and give it back to them. So of course it can't literally mean steal. What it would mean is he would take the property of orphans, improve it, invest money into it, improve it, and then give it back to them in an improved state. V'leiv almana aranin. What does it mean again? The heart of the widow I will sing to. Whenever there was a widow who was struggling to find a shidduch, maybe because she didn't have a family, so Eov would essentially take her in as part of his family. Eov was very prominent, and when people would see, oh, she must be mishpacha to Eov, she would be able to find the shidduch a proper match. Incredible. Lu shakel yishakel ka'osei v'havasi ba'oznaim yisu yachad. So the Gemara says, Amarav afra lepume de Eov. Chavrusa klape shmaya yeshlo. Chavrusa klape shmaya lo. Chavrusa klape shmaya. So I'll say, so now again, we kind of descend into the second part of the story where Eov begins to develop spiritual cracks in the spiritual edifice, and of course, understandably so. Eov says, literally again, if you were to weigh the anger, lu shakel yishakel ka'ose ka'asi v'havsi ba'amaznaim. If you were to go ahead and weigh the anger and experience in the scales, yisu yachad, would they go ahead and be equal? So at this point, again, it appears that Eov is turning a little bit against the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Essentially, what he's saying is, whatever you're angry at me about, take your anger, put it on one side of the scale, put my experiences and put it on the other side of the scale, and does this match up? Whereas Eov doesn't understand, what could I possibly have done to make you so angry, Kadosh Baruch Hu, to visit this level of suffering upon me? So Rav says, Afra lepuma de Eov. Dirt should be put in Eov's. You should wash Eov's mouth out. Chavrusa klape shmayo. Is Kadosh Baruch Hu Eov's friend, that he should talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu like this? Lu yesh beinenu mochiach yashas yado al shenenu. So Eov said, if there was someone to judge between us, talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, someone should judge between us, and we'll see who's going to be right. Amarav afar lepume de Eov. Klum yesh evet shemochiachas rabo. So Rav once again said, there should be dirt into the mouth of Eov. Is there a servant who rebukes his master? Bris karasi leinai uma esbonan al besula. Amarava afra lepuma de Eov. Ihu. So the idea of Eov saying over here that there should be a covenant with my eyes. Uma esbonan al besula. Essentially, I never looked at any other woman. So Eov's trying to figure out, like, what could I possibly have done? So maybe I was immoral, maybe I looked at other women. I never looked at anyone other than my wife. So the Gemara says, Rava says there should be dirt in Eov's mouth. The Eov, Ihu b'achranaisa. So it's true, Eov never looked at another woman. Right? Another one besides his wife. Avram, afilu b'didelos. Avram Avinu was even greater, because Avram Avinu never really even looked lustfully at his own wife. When they were going to Mitzrayim in Parshas Lech Lecha, because of regional famine, so Avram turns to Sarah and he says, I now know that you are a beautiful woman. What does it mean, I now know? He didn't know before. In other words, Avram Avinu was so careful with his thoughts and so careful with what he looked at, that even with his own wife, he was careful with how he looked at her. So we'll say, so the Kala v'anon v'yalach kein yored she'olo yala, Amarava, so literally again, the cloud is finished and has left. Just like the cloud, when it leaves, it leaves. He who goes down to the grave will not come back up. This is what Eov is saying. So this is what happened over here. You see from here that Eov was kafar and tchias amesim. He gave up, he abdicated his belief on resurrection of the dead. Asher b'shara yishufeni v'harba b'tzaychinam. Amarava, so what happened over here? So literally again, Asher b'shara yishufeni, I've been shattered literally again in the gates. V'harba b'tzaychinam, and I'm suffering needlessly. Amarava, Eov b'sara charaf u'b'sara hishivua. So ultimately again, Eov cursed God in a storm, and in the storm he was answered. B'sara charaf t'chsev asher b'shara yishufeni. Right, literally again, I've been shattered in the storm. Amar l'fanav ribbono shalom shema ruach sara avra l'fanecha v'nischaliv l'cha bein oyev Ben Eov la'oyev. So we'll say this is incredible. So we'll say at this point now, what's happening in the story is Eov is broken, and understandably so. He's lost everything. He's lost everything, and he can't figure out why this is occurring. He can't figure out why it's occurring. So he says to Kadosh Baruch Hu, is it possible that maybe you got mixed up, right? There was a wind that was blowing through Shamaim, and ultimately, again, you got mixed up between Eov and Oyev, between Eov, me, and Oyev, an enemy. In other words, what he's asking is, Kadosh Baruch Hu, like, I don't understand. What did I do to deserve this? You're treating me, Eov, as if I am an Oyev, as if I am an enemy of yours. So maybe something happened in Shamaim, maybe there was a strong wind and the message got mixed up a little bit, and you got mixed up between Eov and Oyev. The Gemara says, Kisara Hishivu, Kadosh Baruch Hu responded to him in a storm as well. Vayan Hashem es Eov min asara, vayomer, Azar na ki gibor chalatzecha, esh alcha v'hodi'eni. So he says, so now Kadosh Baruch Hu responds to Eov, and responds to Eov in a very strong way. And he says, ultimately, again, literally, gird yourself like a gibar, right? Ask me, and I will answer you. Amarlo, harbe nimin barasi ba'adam. Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Eov, I created many hairs in the head of man. V'chol nema v'nema barasi la guma b'fnei atzma. Every hair has its own pore. Shelo yushtaim yonkos meguma achos. So that two hairs should not go ahead and get nourished from the same pore. Why? Because if two hairs derive nourishment from the same pore, a person's eyesight will be diminished. Shmuel says, I'm meticulous enough to know which hair goes into which pore. Do you think ultimately again I'll get mixed up between Eov and Oyev? So giving Eov a little bit of Musar back. Mi palag l'shetef tala. So further, Kadosh Baruch Hu says as follows: Harbe tipin barasi ba'avim. I created many droplets of water in the clouds. V'chol tipa v'tipa barasi la defos b'fnei atzma. And every drop has its own channel with which to come down to the world. Kadesh le'yeshtei tipin yotzos midefos echad. So that two droplets of water shouldn't come down from the same channel. Shomalish tipin yotzos midefos echad. Because if two drops were to come down through the same channel from the clouds to the earth, mitashtishoz esharas, it would destroy the world. Ve'elamotzia peros, and the world would not produce produce. So the Gemara says, "Bein tipal atipal on eschalifli." So I know exactly which drop goes into which channel. Bein Eov lo Oyev neschalifli. Do you think I'm going to go ahead and get mixed up between Eov and Oyev? So he's giving it back to Eov. My mashal the high tala lishna devos. How do you know that the lashon of tala is lashon of a channel? Or Rabbi Shila dechsev vayas tala kebesa saim zera. V'derach lechaziz kolos. So furthermore, Kadosh goes on. He says, "Harbe kolos parasi ba'avim." There are many, literally again, thunders. If that's the right word. Thunders, right in the clouds. V'chol kol v'kol parasi lo shvil b'fnei atzma. Every thunder boom has its own shvil, has its own pathway, a sound pathway. Kadesh le'yeshtei kolos yotzos mishvil echad. In order that two sounds should not go ahead and come out of the same pathway. What would happen? Because if two of the thunder booms were to come out of the same pathway, then what would happen? The entire world would be destroyed. Bein kol lekol neschalif. I don't get mixed up between one thunder boom and another thunder boom. Bein Eov la'oyev neschalifli. Am I going to get mixed up between Eov and Oyev? Hayadata ace ledas ya'ili sel. So I'll say. So I just want to point out the common denominator amongst all of those things is they're all very specific things that each have their own thing, right? So each hair has its own pore, right? Each droplet of water has its own channel. Each boom of thunder has its own shvil. So the idea that Kadosh Baruch Hu is trying to convey to you, and this is so theologically profound, is there is a specific plan for every single person. And nothing that happens to any individual is random or happenstance. If every hair has its pore, every droplet has its channel, every thunder boom has its pathway, then every single person has his designated plan. You see, Eov's whole thing over here was Kadosh Baruch Hu. Something must have gotten mixed up over here. You must have gotten mixed up between Eov and Oyev, because this life doesn't make any sense to me. To which Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I promise, even if you don't understand it, it's the plan. And even if you don't understand it, it's your plan. And even if you don't understand why these particular things are happening to you, in no way does that erode the fact that each and every one of these events is coming from me to you and designated for your growth and your self-actualization. Again, we'll come back to that. We'll zoom back out to that in just a moment. But Kadosh Baruch Hu is not finished. He goes on, he says, Hayadata, last line of Tezainum Dav 16a. Hayadata es ledes ya'ili sela cholel ayalos tishmor ya'ala. So ultimately, again, cholel ayalos tishmar. Do you know the time that the mountain goat gives birth? So the Gemara says, what does that mean? The mountain goat is very cruel to its offspring. In other words, the mountain goat does not in the immediate moment after birth, the mountain goat does not care for its offspring properly, and what it ends up doing is it allows it to die. So the Gemara says, what happens? So b'shasha kora'as laledes amud beis. We'll say 16b. At the time that the mountain goat crouches to go ahead and give birth, ola l'rosh hahar. Ultimately, again, it goes up to the top of the mountain, so that after giving birth, its offspring, right, the little goat, the baby goat, should roll down the hill and die. So the idea over here seems to be that the mountain goat is in so much pain from birth that it's just totally indifferent to the plight of its offspring. So it goes to the top of the mountain, gives birth with the intention that it rolls down. Okay. And at that exact moment that the mountain goat gives birth, I arrange that an eagle should come, catch the baby as it's being birthed, as it's rolling down, but catch the baby or before it rolls down, and deposit the baby back with its mother. Incredible. And if that eagle would be 1 minute earlier, 1 minute late, miyad meis. Ultimately, the baby would die. So if I could time the eagle coming at the exact moment, I don't get mixed up between one moment and another moment. Ultimately, again, ben Eov la'oyev neschalifli. Am I going to go ahead and get mixed up between Eov and Oyev? Furthermore, cholal ayalos tishmar, the pangs of the ayal, the gazelle. Ultimately, again, I will guard. What does that mean? Sa'ayala, so this gazelle, Sa'ayala zu rach matzah, is a very narrow birth canal. So at the time that it gives birth, I guess technically speaking, the birth canal is too narrow for the baby to come out. So what happens at the time that it's giving birth? Mazmin and la darkon. I summon up a snake, shemakisha bebeis harechem, that bites the mother right by the birth canal. Umisrapa, and as a result of the snake bite, it opens up. Umisrata mimolada. The snake would come and bite the mother 1 minute earlier, 1 minute later, she would die. So the Gemara says, Ben rega l'rega alon es chayfash. Baruch says, if I could be that exact between one moment and another, Ben Eov la'oyev neschalifli, am I going to get mixed up between Eov and Oyev? So the Gemara says, Eov lo bedasi daber udvar lo bahaskel. So Eov, the pasuk says, Eov, his words did not speak with intellect, right? And his words were not measured with wisdom. So the Gemara says, Uksiv, kilo dibartem elai nechon kavdi Yoav, amarava, mikan shein adam nitbas b'shas tzara. So we'll say, this is incredible. And I will say, here it comes. So there is a fundamental machlokas in how to understand the entire narrative of Eov. At the end of the day, did Eov crack? Right? Did he crack like the Satan said he would, and at a certain point he just turns his back and rebels against the HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Or maybe not. Or maybe what Rav, and this is what Rav is saying, is Eov said some things, but you know what? People say stuff when they're in pain. But what they say when they're in pain is not really reflective of who and what they are and what they truly believe. It's just what they say in a tremendous moment of pain. So Rabbi says, Eov remained righteous this entire time. He said things against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi says, a person is not held accountable for things that he says in his time of pain. So essentially, HaKadosh Baruch Hu recognized that Eov was just saying stuff motivated out of pain, but he never for a moment changed his attitude of obedience towards the Ribono Shel Olam. So a really incredible idea. And I will say, in general, also, this statement is a powerful statement for our interpersonal relationships as well. That sometimes people say stuff to us, and we're very taken aback and shocked by what they said, how they said it. And sometimes if you take a step back, you'll realize very often when people say hurtful or harmful things, they themselves are in a state of pain. and are often not dealing with that pain in an appropriate way, and so it's coming like splashing out at me. I'm like in the splash zone of someone else's pain, which is not right? You never really have an excuse to vent at anyone. A person should be in greater control of their emotions, but we're people, and sometimes people in pain, because they have not properly dealt with or processed their pain, do painful things to other people. Now, if you're the perpetrator of such a thing like that, you don't get a pass. Just because you're in pain doesn't give you the right to go ahead and inflict pain upon others. But sometimes when you're the recipient of that negative treatment and you take a step back and you realize, okay, that person is a good person, and the truth is they're probably going through something right now in life that is causing them to act a certain way. If you're able to adapt that approach in your interpersonal dealings, you can salvage a lot of relationships, because so often all we see is the behavior and we don't try to see the person behind the behavior. So yeah, right, this person hurt me, this person did something bad to me, this person spoke to me in a way that's unacceptable. Okay, I got it. And they have to rectify that. But how I view that person is very often a person who's just in immense pain, who's just acting out because of their pain. That's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals with Eov. Now, I will say, before we get to the rest of this, we're going to go now transition to the next part of the Eov story, which is the conversation between Eov and his friends and his colleagues. So we'll say, so in general, how are we to understand this entire story of Eov, right? The story itself is so troubling if you just think about it. Like, it's troubling just what is going on over here. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, have you seen my servant Eov? And the Satan is coming along and saying, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's not so great. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives the Satan the license to go ahead and afflict Eov. So really it does seem that Eov is suffering for no good reason. He loses his children, he loses his wealth, he loses his health, he loses everything. Why? Because of like a showdown between the Satan and between HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It doesn't make any sense. You're Ribbon Shalom. First of all, excuse me, Ribbon Shalom. You don't owe anything to the Satan. You don't have to respond, right? We say this to our kids from the time that they're young. Just because someone says something, you don't have to respond. So the Satan is taunting you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why are you responding? But if you put this all together and you understand, of course, that the Satan is the Yitzhar, is the Malach HaMaves, which means he's not out to get us. These are the very mechanisms and forces that are there for our own growth and self-actualization. I think that perhaps the entire yesod of Sefer Eov is to recognize that sometimes suffering comes across as totally nonsensical. And this is an important theological pill for us to swallow, a difficult one to swallow, but a necessary one nevertheless. You often can't make sense of suffering. The story is presented as an illogical story by design. Really, this is it, because the Satan and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are getting into a contest over here about who knows the most righteous man in the world. So the Satan says it's Avram, and the HaKadosh Baruch Hu says it's Eov. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, go ahead, test my Eov. You say, all right, really? That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Hashem loves us. He loves us more than we could ever imagine. So Hashem is willing to go ahead and ruin Eov's life because of a contest with the Satan. So no, I think what the Gemara is trying to tell us, what Sefer Eov is trying to teach us, is that sometimes when you look at the suffering in this world, there is no rational understanding of it. It doesn't make sense. Almost like this story doesn't make sense. That one man's life is ruined because of a contest between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Satan. Does that make any sense? Is that the Ribono Shel Olam we know? Is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And the answer is, we don't understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we certainly don't understand suffering in this world. And the moment that you accept the premise that you don't understand suffering, and very often in life, the greater the suffering, the less the probability that I'm going to be able to discover the root of it or understand why or what occurred, the more you are able to power through it in life. You know, we've quoted many times, David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Keli, Keli, lama azavtani. My God, why have you forsaken me? And David HaMelech said that in a moment of intense suffering, moment of incredibly intense suffering. What are you doing? What are you doing? Why have you left me? Rabbi Soloveitchik said that it can't be that David HaMelech was saying, Keli, Keli, lama, why have you left me? David HaMelech is asking why? Why do the righteous suffer? That is a question as old as time itself. David HaMelech knows better. So rather, what was David HaMelech asking? Keli, Keli, lima asaftani. Not why, but for what? I accept the fact that I'm not going to get the answer to the why of suffering. And I will say this is so important. I'm not going to understand the why. And that's from the beginning of time. I'm not going to understand the Crusades. I'm not going to understand the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. I'm not going to understand the Holocaust. I'm not going to understand October 7th. I'm not going to understand the full why of the suffering. So what do I do with suffering? So therefore, what suffering is meaningless? Suffering is no. What I do with suffering is the what. What do I do with these circumstances? I don't understand why Hashem visits suffering upon me and upon my people. I don't understand. And sometimes it's arrogant to even try to go and describe the why. Again, Chazal are able to do it. So Chazal could tell us the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of sinas chinam. Chazal could tell us that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed ultimately again because of gil Aryeh, shvichus and Lazar. Chazal could say that. But you and me, even today contemporarily, we don't have people that have shoulders like that to be able to tell us why suffering occurs. We don't have that. That's a function of nevuah. That's a function of anshe kines sagdol. It's a function of Sanhedrin. We don't have that today. But what we do have, I don't have the why, but I do have the what. What I'm suffering, and we all suffer in different ways. I'm suffering now. What do I do with that suffering? What should I do with it? I'm not going to exhaust myself intellectually and spiritually trying to figure out the why, because again, that's what Sefer Eov comes along. Sefer Eov says is that sometimes suffering is going to appear random, and often it appears nonsensical. And there are times you're going to realize, Kosh Baruch Hu, what are you doing? And there are going to be times somebody going to lash out at God, and that's why Rava comes along and says it's okay. Even if you lash out at God during suffering, a person is not held accountable for words that they utter in a moment of pain. Suffering looks unreasonable. And suffering looks nonsensical, and it doesn't seem to make any sense. And suffering often occurs without a rhyme or a reason. Okay, accept it. Accept that you're not going to understand suffering because I'm not going to understand how HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs His world. But now that I don't understand the why, I have to focus on the what. What should I do with these circumstances? How should I power through this? What is there to learn about myself? What is there to learn about my circumstances? And how can I harness the energy of these difficult circumstances, plow them inward, and utilize them for self-actualization? That's the message of Sefer Eov. So let's go weiter. Vayishma shloshes roi Eov es kol hara hazot sabaylav vayavo ishim komo elifaz hateimani bilda lashuchi b'tzofar hanaamasi. So now Eov's three friends heard all about what had happened to him, and now they all come to him. Right? These are his three friends. We're going to see each of them came from their own respective places. They lived in different places. They all came to see Eov. So the Gemara says, so they all came again to speak with him, to console him. What does it mean they came together? So ultimately, they literally all entered in through the same gate. So ultimately, again, they lived a long distance from each other, but yet they all came exactly the same time through the same entrance. So the Gemara says, if they lived so far from each other, how did they know that something was going on with Eov? So it says very beautiful. So these were three very close friends. So they had a crown, each had a crown, and on the crown they had the image of all the friends. Apparently this was some type of crown, some type of power. Whenever one of the friends was in distress, ultimately again, so the image of that friend would change. So they saw on the crown that Eov's image changed. They sensed that something happened. Alternatively, they went ahead and they planted a tree together. And that tree, right, if it was vital, it meant everybody was doing well. And if it wasn't vital, someone was in trouble. So I will say, by the way, just an incredible, and that's why they knew something was up. And even though they lived a distance from each other, they all came to visit him. So I will say, happens also, this is a beautiful insight into friendship, right? What is we use the word friend and acquaintance so interchangeably. Someone even who I know casually is a friend. That's not true. What's a friend? A friend is someone whose pain you feel like your own. That's a friend. Cheverschaft. A friendship means I care about you like I care about myself. I care about your pain like I feel your pain like I feel my own pain. That's a friend. So they come to see Eov. Amarava. Hainu da'amin. She's what people say. O chavusa kechavre Eov o mitusa. Right? Either get friends. If you have friends like Eov's friends, then life is worth living. If you don't have friendship or companionship like that, life is not worth living. Give me friends like Eov or give me death. A very profound statement. So the Gemara goes on a little bit of a tangent over here. Back to Bereshis. that it was when the men, right, when mankind began to propagate upon the entire earth, ubanos yildu lahem, and ultimately again they had daughters. They had daughters. Good. They had daughters. So the Gemara says this: Rabbi Yochanan Amar Rivya. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Rivya Ba'ali Olam. When a person has a daughter, so ultimately Rivya, literally propagation comes because a daughter has the ability to go ahead and produce more life. Reish Lakish Meriva Ba'ali Olam. Reish Lakish says when daughters come into this world, fighting comes into this world. Okay, so ultimately, again, apparently there's more quarreling in the house when maybe there are daughters. So we'll say we're going to see at the end of the Eov story. So Eov emerges theologically strong with his belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu intact, and the Rebbe Shalom gives him back all that he lost. Gives him, more children. Not that new children could replace old children or deceased children, but gave him more children, more wealth. So if that's the case, when Eov was given daughters, why wasn't he given even more daughters? He wasn't given more daughters, but the new daughters he was given were even more beautiful than his daughters who passed away. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Interesting names. So these are the 3 new daughters. So why did he call her Yemima? Yemima Shaisa Domali Yom. So he called her all the story Yemima because she was so beautiful, like she was radiant like the sun, like the day. Ktsia Shahaisa Recha Nodev Kiketsia. So he called the second daughter Ktsia because she was as fragrant as a Ktsia plant. Karen Hafach, what's Karen Hafach? Amin de Rabbi Shila Shedoma Lekarno de Karash. She looked like the horns of the Karash animal. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? They laughed about this interpretation in Eretz Yisrael. Karna the Karash lakusihi. The Karen of the Karash doesn't look particularly beautiful. In other words, it's not a nice looking thing. Elam Rav Chisda kekurkama derishka b'minei. Shne'emar ki sikri bafoch. So rather, again, she was as beautiful as saffron that grew in the garden. Okay, the idea here is that even though Eo was not given more children, the daughters he was given were even more beautiful. Let's go ahead and just read one more piece. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Isyal Dali Barta. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi had a daughter. He was upset. It's interesting. He wanted a son. He was upset. Amar le'avua Revia Basli Olam. So his father said to him, "What are you upset about? To have a daughter of such a schos, you've brought life, and now a future giver of life was also born." Ultimately, again, your father has given. We'll say, actually, no, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem. I know it's okay. Tomorrow, the following day's daf. Tomorrow's daf is a little bit shorter. We'll stop over here today. We'll say, tremendous shkoyach, everyone. Such a schus. I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you today, but I didn't want to miss out on the opportunity to learn together. Shkoyach. I'm looking forward to continuing this beautiful Gemara together. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.